Jake Morrison pressed his back against the cold metal wall and tried to slow his breathing. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. 3 days ago, he had been part of a 12-man squad sent to check on the mining station, on Kepler 442b. Now he was the only one left alive. The planet was a frozen wasteland covered in strange blue crystals that grew like trees from the ground. The crystals made a soft humming sound when the wind blew through them, and they glowed with a pale light that never went out. It should have been beautiful, but now all Jake could think about was how the light made it easier for the aliens to hunt him. Jake had watched through his rifle scope as the bug-like creatures killed his friends one by one. The aliens looked like giant praying mantises, but they walked on 2 legs like humans. Their skin was dark green and shiny, and their eyes were huge and black. When they killed someone, they made a sound like laughter, but it was cold and cruel. Though aliens called themselves Zephyrians, and they loved to hunt. Not for food, but for fun. They would track their prey for days, playing with them before moving in for the kill. Jake had learned this from the briefings back at the base, but hearing about it and living through it were very different things. The attack had come without warning. Jake's squad was setting up equipment near the mining station when the first alien appeared, then another, then 20 more. They came from behind the crystal formations, moving fast and quiet. Jake's team never had a chance to call for help. Sergeant Collins had tried to organize a defense, but the aliens were too smart. They surrounded the humans and picked them off one at a time. Jake had been on watch duty on a small hill when the attack started. He could only watch as his friends died, too far away to help them. Now Jake was hiding in an old research building near the mining station. The building was made of thick metal and had only a few windows. It was supposed to be abandoned, but the power still worked and some of the computers were still running. Jake had found maps of the area and learned that the building had been used to study the strange crystals on the planet. Through the security cameras, Jake could see the aliens moving around outside. At first, there had been 20 of them. Then, more came, and more. Jake counted them carefully and felt his stomach drop. There were over 100 aliens now, all surrounding his building. The aliens were not in a hurry. They knew Jake was trapped, and they were enjoying the hunt. They moved in slow circles around the building, getting closer each time. Some of them would come right up to the windows and look inside, their big black eyes searching for him. When they saw movement, they would make that laughing sound and tap on the glass with their sharp claws. Jake checked his equipment again. He had 1 plasma rifle with 2 battery packs. Each pack was good for about 50 shots if he was careful. He also had a combat knife, 3 grenades, and his grandfather's old watch. The watch still worked even though all the other electronic equipment was acting strange because of something the aliens were doing to mess up radio signals. The aliens had cut off all communication with the outside world. Jake's radio was dead, and the building's long-range transmitter was not working. Even if he could fix it, the next supply ship was not due for 2 weeks. By then, he would be long dead. Jake found some food and water in the building's emergency supplies. There was enough for maybe 3 days if he was careful. The aliens could wait much longer than that. They were patient hunters, and they knew that time was on their side. As Jake ate a protein bar and drank some water, he thought about his family back on Earth. His mother would be worried when she did not get his weekly message. His little sister, Amy, was only 10 years old, and she always asked him to bring her back something interesting from his missions. Jake had planned to bring her one of the glowing crystals from this planet. Now he wondered if he would ever see her again. The aliens outside were getting more active as the planet's sun began to set. Jake could hear them moving around, making clicking sounds to talk to each other. They were planning something, and Jake knew it would not be good for him. Jake moved to the building's control room and started looking at the security screens more carefully. The aliens had spread out in 3 circles around the building. The inner circle was about 50 meters away, the second circle was at 100 meters, and the outer circle was at 200 meters. It was a classic hunting formation designed to make sure nothing could escape. But Jake noticed something interesting. The aliens were following a pattern. They moved like they were following instincts, not really thinking about what they were doing. They stayed in their groups and moved in predictable ways. This gave Jake an idea. The research building had several floors and many rooms. There were also maintenance tunnels that connected different parts of the building. Jake had found the building's blueprints on one of the computers, and he was starting to form a plan. The aliens were thinking like hunters, but Jake was thinking like a soldier. His grandfather had been in the military and had told him many stories about fighting against bigger and stronger enemies. The key was not to fight fair. The key was to use everything you had and never give up. Jake looked at his grandfather's watch. It was almost midnight, planet time. The aliens would probably attack soon. They liked to hunt in the dark, and they thought one human would be easy prey. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Jake stood up and checked his rifle one more time. He made sure his knife was secure on his belt and that his grenades were easy to reach. Then he walked to the building's main computer and started typing commands. The research building had many systems that Jake thought he could use. There were atmospheric processors that controlled the air in the building. There were industrial lights that could be turned on and off. There were emergency systems that could seal doors and release gas. The building also had connections to the mining equipment outside. Jake was not just a soldier. He had studied engineering before joining the military, and he understood how machines worked. The aliens might be better hunters, but they did not understand human technology. As Jake worked on his plan, he could hear the aliens getting closer to the building. They were making more noise now, clicking and hissing to each other. Some of them were scraping their claws against the metal walls, trying to frighten him. Jake was scared, but he was also angry. These creatures had killed his friends for sport. They thought humans were just animals to be hunted. They were about to learn that humans were the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. The building's computer systems were old but still working. Jake found the emergency protocols and started making changes. He set up timed sequences that would trigger different systems throughout the building. He also found controls for some of the mining equipment outside. Through the security cameras, Jake could see that the aliens were getting ready to attack. The inner circle was moving closer, and the creatures were spreading out to cover all the exits. They thought they had him trapped. Jake smiled for the first time in 3 days. The trap was set, but not the way the aliens thought. In a few minutes, they would learn what it meant to hunt a human. Jake sat in the dark control room and remembered everything he had learned about the Zephyrians. The memory files from the military database were clear in his mind. These aliens came from a world called Zephyr Prime, where the strongest creatures hunted in giant packs. On their planet, being part of a big group meant you would always win. The Zephyrians had been expanding into human space for the past 5 years. They did not want human planets for resources or land. They wanted them for hunting grounds. To a Zephyrian, the perfect hunt was when many hunters worked together to kill one strong prey. The bigger the hunting party, the more honor they gained. Jake had studied their battle records at the military academy. The aliens had attacked 12 human colonies, and they always used the same method. First, they would send scouts to watch and learn about their targets. Then they would gather a huge hunting party, sometimes 300 or 400 strong. Finally, they would attack all at once, surrounding their prey and closing in slowly. The worst part was that they did not kill quickly. Zephyrians believed that good prey should fight back and try to escape. They would wound their targets and let them run, then track them down again. The hunt could go on for days or even weeks. To them, this was art. But Jake also remembered something else from his studies. The Zephyrians had never faced organized human military forces. All of their victories had been against civilian settlements or small outposts. They had never fought anyone who really knew how to fight back. Jake's grandfather had been a soldier in the old Earth wars before humans reached the stars. He had fought in places with names like Afghanistan and Iraq, where small groups of fighters had to survive against much larger armies. Grandpa Morrison had taught Jake that when you could not win with strength, you had to win with your brain. The old man had told Jake stories about soldiers who used the land around them as a weapon. They would hide in caves and strike fast, then disappear before the enemy could fight back. They would use bombs and traps to make the enemy afraid to move. Most importantly, they would make the enemy think they were fighting ghosts instead of people. Jake looked at the security screens again. The Zephyrians were moving in their hunting formation, just like their instincts told them to do. They stayed in their groups and followed their pack leaders. This made them strong when they hunted normal prey, but it also made them predictable. The research building Jake was hiding in had been built by humans, which meant it was built to be practical and efficient. Every room had multiple exits. Every system had backup controls. Every dangerous process had safety measures that could be turned off if someone knew how. Jake pulled up the building schematics on the computer screen. The facility had been designed to study the crystal formations on the planet, but it also had equipment for mining and processing. There were chemical storage tanks, high-pressure gas lines, electrical transformers, and industrial machinery. All of it was connected by maintenance tunnels that were too small for the large Zephyrians to use. The aliens were thinking like predators, but Jake was thinking like an engineer. He could turn the entire building into a weapon if he was smart about it. Jake opened the building's maintenance manual and started reading about the atmospheric control systems. The facility used a complex air recycling system that could be adjusted for different types of work. If Jake changed the settings, he could fill certain areas with gases that would be harmless to humans, but very dangerous to aliens with different biology. The security system was also interesting. The building had blast doors that could seal off different sections in case of an emergency. The doors were strong enough to stop explosions and were controlled by the main computer. Jake could open and close them from the control room, creating paths for himself while blocking the aliens. Outside, Jake could see that the Zephyrians were starting to move closer to the building. Their leader was a big alien with bright red markings on its head. It was clicking orders to the others, and they were spreading out to cover every possible escape route. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never lost a hunt. Jake smiled as he watched them. The aliens were so sure of themselves that they were not being careful. They thought one human could never be a threat to so many hunters. Their arrogance would be their weakness. The mining equipment outside the building was also under Jake's control. The facility used automated diggers and transport vehicles to move the crystal formations. These machines were built to work in the harsh environment of the planet, which meant they were very strong and could move through almost anything. Jake found the controls for the mining equipment and started programming new instructions. He could make the machines move in patterns that would confuse the aliens and break up their formations. Some of the equipment even had tools that could be dangerous if used in the right way. The building's power system gave Jake even more options. The facility used fusion generators that created enormous amounts of electricity. This power ran through cables and transformers throughout the building and the mining area. If Jake overloaded certain circuits, he could create electrical fields that would be deadly to anything that touched them. Jake also discovered that the building had emergency lighting systems designed to guide people to safety during disasters. These lights were incredibly bright and could be turned on all at once. The Zephyrians had evolved on a planet with very little light, which meant their big eyes were sensitive to bright illumination. As Jake planned his strategy, he thought about the psychological aspects of warfare that his grandfather had taught him. Fear was often more powerful than weapons. If Jake could make the aliens afraid and confused, they would start making mistakes. Once they lost confidence in their hunting pack, they would become much easier to defeat. The key was to make them think they were not hunting one human, but that one human was hunting them. Jake needed to become the predator instead of the prey. Jake looked at his grandfather's watch again. It was almost 1 a.m, and the aliens were getting ready to attack. He could see them forming up in their assault groups, preparing to storm the building from multiple directions at once. But Jake was ready for them. He had spent the last hour turning the research facility into a maze of death traps and surprises. Every system in the building was now under his control, and he had backup plans for his backup plans. The Zephyrians thought they were about to end a hunt that had lasted 3 days. They were expecting to find a scared and desperate human who would try to hide until they found him. Instead, they were about to walk into a carefully planned ambush created by someone who understood both human engineering and alien psychology. Jake picked up his plasma rifle and checked the charge levels one more time. He had positioned spare equipment at key locations throughout the building. and he had mapped out movement routes that would let him strike and then disappear before the aliens could respond. The aliens outside were making their final preparations, clicking excitedly to each other as they anticipated an easy victory. Their hunt was about to begin, but they did not realize that the roles of hunter and prey were about to be reversed. Jake Morrison was no longer running. Now, he was ready to fight back, and he was going to show these aliens what happened when they tried to hunt a human who refused to be prey. Jake watched the security screens as the alien leader raised one of its sharp claws into the air. The gesture meant the attack was about to begin. All around the building, over 100 Zephyrians started moving forward in perfect formation. They were confident and excited, clicking to each other in their strange language. Jake took a deep breath and pressed the first button on his control panel. Every light in the research facility turned on at the same time. The sudden brightness was like a small sun exploding in the darkness. The emergency floodlights, work lights, security lights, and even the decorative lights all blazed to life at once. The light was so intense that Jake had to close his eyes even though he was inside the building. Outside, the effect on the Zephyrians was immediate and devastating. The aliens had evolved in caves and dark forests on their home planet. Their huge black eyes were designed to see in almost complete darkness, but they could not handle bright light. The sudden illumination hit them like a physical blow. Jake opened his eyes and looked at the security monitors. The aliens were stumbling around blindly, covering their eyes with their claws and making sounds of pain and confusion. Their perfect hunting formation was falling apart as they crashed into each other and the crystal formations around the building. But Jake was not finished. While the aliens were still blind and confused, he activated the second part of his plan. The research building had blast doors at every major entrance and corridor intersection. These heavy metal barriers were designed to contain explosions and toxic gas leaks. Now Jake used them to trap the aliens who had gotten too close to the building. Several Zephyrians had been right next to the entrances when the lights came on. As they stumbled around trying to escape the brightness, Jake sealed the blast doors. The aliens found themselves trapped in small areas between the doors and the building walls with nowhere to run. Jake picked up his plasma rifle and moved to the first firing position he had prepared. Through a reinforced window he could see 3 aliens trapped in the entrance area below. They were still covering their eyes and trying to find a way out. Jake aimed carefully and fired. The plasma bolt hit the first alien in the center of its chest, and the creature fell without making a sound. The other 2 aliens heard the weapon fire and tried to find cover, but there was nowhere to hide in the small space. 2 more shots, and the entrance was clear. Jake moved quickly through the building's maintenance tunnels to his next position. The tunnels were narrow and built for human-sized workers, which meant the larger aliens could not follow him even if they knew where he was. Outside, the remaining Zephyrians were starting to recover from the light attack. Their leader was clicking angry orders trying to reorganize the hunting party. But Jake could see on the security monitors that they were no longer confident. The easy hunt they had expected was turning into something very different. Jake reached the building's atmospheric control center and activated the third part of his plan. The research facility used different gas mixtures in different areas depending on what kind of work was being done. Jake changed the settings so that toxic gases would be released in specific areas around the building. He opened the valves that released hydrogen sulfide gas near the building's north side, where about 20 aliens had taken cover behind some mining equipment. The gas was invisible and odorless to humans in small amounts, but it was deadly to most alien species. The Zephyrians on the north side started making choking sounds and stumbling away from the area. Some of them collapsed before they could escape the gas cloud. Others ran in panic, breaking their formation and leaving their positions. Jake moved to another firing position and waited. As the aliens ran from the gas, they moved directly into his line of sight. He fired his plasma rifle in controlled bursts, picking off the aliens one by one as they fled in confusion. The psychological effect was exactly what Jake had hoped for. The Zephyrians were no longer acting like confident hunters. They were scared and confused, running from an enemy they could not see or understand. Their pack instincts were breaking down as individual aliens started thinking about survival instead of the hunt. Jake activated the mining equipment outside the building. The automated diggers and transport vehicles started moving according to the new programs he had written. The machines drove through the alien formations, forcing the Zephyrians to scatter and dive for cover. One of the mining vehicles was a huge hauler designed to carry tons of crystal ore. Jake programmed it to drive in circles around a group of aliens who had taken cover behind some storage containers. The aliens could not escape because the vehicle blocked their path, and they could not attack it because it was heavily armored. While they were trapped, Jake used the building's chemical processing equipment to create a cloud of caustic vapor that drifted over their position. The aliens had to choose between staying in the toxic cloud or running into the open where Jake could shoot them. Most of them chose to run. Jake was ready for them. From his position in the building's upper level, Jake had a clear view of the entire area around the facility. He used his plasma rifle like a precision instrument, taking careful aim and making every shot count. The aliens were so panicked that they were not even trying to find cover anymore. They just ran in random directions, making themselves easy targets. Jake moved through the building using the maintenance tunnels and prepared firing positions he had set up earlier. Every few minutes he would appear at a different window or doorway, fire several shots, and then disappear before the aliens could figure out where the attack had come from. To the Zephyrians, it seemed like the human was everywhere at once. They could not predict where the next attack would come from, and they could not coordinate their response because their formations had been completely destroyed. The alien leader tried to rally his hunting party by making loud clicking calls, but fewer and fewer aliens were responding. Some had been killed by Jake's weapons or traps. Others had been poisoned by the gases or injured by the mining equipment. Many more had simply run away in panic. Jake checked his rifle's power level. He had used about half of his first battery pack, but he had eliminated nearly 40 aliens. The odds were still not good, but they were much better than they had been an hour ago. More importantly, Jake could see that the remaining aliens were losing their will to fight. They were no longer thinking like predators. They were thinking like prey, and that changed everything. Jake activated the final part of his opening attack. The research building had an emergency siren system designed to warn workers about dangerous conditions. Jake turned on all the sirens at once and set them to produce the most disturbing sounds possible. The noise was terrible even for Jake, who was inside the building and expecting it. For the aliens outside, who were already confused and frightened, the sound was like torture. The high-pitched wailing mixed with deep bass tones that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Several more aliens broke and ran. Others huddled together and covered their heads, trying to block out the horrible noise. Their perfect hunting formation was now completely destroyed, replaced by small groups of scared creatures who just wanted the nightmare to end. Jake looked at his grandfather's watch. The battle had been going on for only 12 minutes, but he had already turned a hopeless situation into something he might actually survive. The aliens had expected to hunt one frightened human. Instead, they had walked into a carefully planned ambush that used every advantage Jake could create. The hunt was far from over, but now Jake was the one doing the hunting. Jake turned off the sirens and listened to the sounds outside the building. Instead of the confident clicking and hissing he had heard before, there was mostly silence broken by occasional whimpering and frightened calls. The psychological attack had worked even better than he had hoped. Through the security monitors, Jake counted the remaining aliens. There were less than 30 left out of the original 100. Some were dead, some were injured, and many had simply run away into the crystal forest. The ones who remained were huddled in small groups, no longer behaving like a coordinated hunting party. Jake switched his rifle to the second battery pack and moved to a new position. The maintenance tunnels allowed him to travel through the building without being seen, appearing at different locations like a ghost. This was exactly the kind of psychological warfare his grandfather had told him about. The alien leader was still alive, but Jake could see that it was struggling to maintain control. The big creature with red markings kept trying to organize the survivors, but they were too scared to follow orders properly. Every time it tried to form them into a group, another trap or attack would scatter them again. Jake decided it was time to focus on individual targets instead of area attacks. He moved to a window that overlooked a storage area where 5 aliens had taken cover behind some metal containers. They thought they were safe there, but Jake had prepared for this situation. The storage area contained tanks of compressed gas, used for the mining equipment. Jake had earlier loosened the connections on several tanks and set up a remote trigger. Now he activated it. The gas tanks began to leak, creating an invisible cloud that drifted toward the hiding aliens. When the gas reached the right concentration, Jake fired a single plasma bolt into the cloud. The explosion was smaller than Jake had expected, but it was loud and bright enough to send the 5 aliens running in panic. As they fled from the storage area, Jake was ready with his rifle. 3 of them fell before they could reach new cover. The remaining 2 aliens found themselves trapped in an open area between the storage containers and the building. Jake had positioned mining equipment to block their escape routes, and toxic gas was still drifting from the direction they had come from. One of the aliens tried to climb onto a mining vehicle to escape. Jake shot it before it could reach the top. The last alien simply stood in the open and made a sound Jake had never heard before. It was a high-pitched wailing that sounded like crying. Jake hesitated for a moment. He had never heard a Zephyrian make a sound like that. But then he remembered his dead friends and fired. The alien leader saw its hunting party falling apart and made a desperate decision. It began making loud calls that were different from its previous commands. Jake recognized the sounds from his military training. The leader was calling for a full retreat. But Jake was not going to let them escape that easily. He had prepared for this possibility too. Jake activated the mining equipment that surrounded the area. The big machines began moving in a coordinated pattern that herded the fleeing aliens back toward the building. Every time the creatures tried to run in one direction, a mining vehicle would block their path and force them to turn. The aliens found themselves being driven in circles, unable to escape the area around the research facility. They were trapped in Jake's killing ground, and he intended to finish what they had started. Jake used this opportunity to hunt the remaining aliens one by one. He would appear at a window, fire a few shots, and then disappear before they could respond. The aliens tried to rush the building several times, but the blast doors kept them out and Jake's rifle kept them dying. Some of the aliens tried to hide among the crystal formations, but Jake used the building's external sensors to track their heat signatures. The crystals provided visual cover but could not hide body heat. Jake found each hiding alien and eliminated them with precise shots. Other aliens attempted to damage the building's power systems, thinking they could shut down Jake's advantages. But human engineering was built with redundancy and backup systems. When they destroyed one power line, another would automatically take over. When they damaged the main generator, the backup generators kicked in. Jake had also prepared surprises for aliens who tried to get too close to the building's infrastructure. He had rigged explosive charges around the critical systems, controlled by motion sensors. When aliens approached, the charges would detonate, killing the saboteurs and protecting the equipment. The alien leader made one final attempt to save its hunting party. It began making different calls, trying to summon more reinforcements from somewhere in the crystal forest. Jake realized that there might be even more Zephyrians on the planet, waiting to join the hunt. Jake could not allow that to happen. He needed to end this battle before more enemies arrived. Jake found the building's long-range communication array and discovered that it was not completely destroyed. The aliens had damaged it, but Jake's engineering knowledge allowed him to make temporary repairs. He managed to send out a distress signal with his location and situation, but Jake knew that help would not arrive for hours at best. He had to finish the fight with the resources he had available. Jake made a bold decision. Instead of continuing to hide in the building and pick off individual aliens, he would go outside and face the remaining creatures directly. It was risky, but it would also be completely unexpected. Jake gathered his equipment and prepared for the final phase of the battle. He strapped on his combat knife, loaded his last grenade, and made sure his rifle was fully charged. He also took some of the chemical canisters he had found in the building, which could be used as improvised weapons. Before leaving the building, Jake set up a final trap. He programmed the building systems to create a massive explosion if anyone tried to enter after he left. This would prevent any surviving aliens from taking shelter in the facility and would also serve as a beacon for rescue ships. Jake opened the building's main door and stepped outside for the first time in hours. The cold air of the alien planet hit his face, and he could smell the strange chemicals and gases that lingered from his earlier attacks. The remaining aliens saw him emerge and could not believe what they were seeing. The human they had been hunting was walking toward them, alone and apparently unafraid. It went against everything they understood about prey behavior. Jake began walking steadily toward the largest group of surviving aliens. His rifle was ready, and his mind was calm. He had turned the hunters into the hunted, and now he was going to finish the job. The alien leader stood up and made a challenging call, but Jake could hear the fear in its voice. The creature that had been so confident a few hours ago was now facing a human who had systematically destroyed its entire hunting party. Jake smiled as he continued walking forward. The aliens had wanted to hunt a human for sport. Now they were about to learn what it really meant to be prey. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Jake Morrison was ready to show these creatures why humans had become the most feared species in the galaxy. Jake walked across the frozen ground toward the remaining aliens with steady, measured steps. There were only 15 Zephyrians left, and they were clustered together near a large crystal formation about 50 meters from the building. They had their backs to the crystals and were facing him, but Jake could see the fear in their huge black eyes. The alien leader stepped forward from the group. It was larger than the others and had bright red markings that showed its rank. The creature raised its claws and made a threatening sound, but Jake could hear that its voice was shaking. This was not the confident predator that had surrounded the building hours earlier. Jake stopped walking when he was 20 meters away from the aliens. He held his plasma rifle ready, but did not point it directly at them yet. He wanted them to see him clearly, to understand that one human had destroyed their entire hunting party. The alien leader made a series of clicking sounds. Jake did not speak their language, but he understood the meaning. The creature was trying to negotiate, perhaps offering to let him live if he surrendered. It was desperate and afraid, grasping for any way to save itself and its remaining followers. Jake shook his head slowly. There would be no mercy for creatures that hunted his friends for sport. The aliens began to spread out, trying to surround Jake just as they had surrounded the building. But there were too few of them left, and they were too frightened to coordinate properly. Jake could see gaps in their formation and weaknesses in their positioning. Jake raised his rifle and fired at the alien furthest to his left. The plasma bolt hit the creature in the shoulder, spinning it around and sending it crashing to the ground. The other aliens flinched at the sound of the weapon and their formation wavered. Before they could recover, Jake was moving. He ran toward the group at an angle, firing as he went. 2 more aliens fell before they could react. The others scattered, running in different directions like frightened animals. This was exactly what Jake had expected. The aliens had lost their pack coordination and were now acting on individual survival instincts. They were no longer hunters working together. They were just scared creatures trying to stay alive. Jake pursued the alien leader, which was running toward the crystal forest. The creature was fast, but Jake was faster and more determined. He caught up to it near a cluster of blue crystals that hummed softly in the cold air. The alien leader turned to face Jake, raising its claws in a fighting stance. It was bigger and stronger than Jake, with natural weapons that could cut through metal. But Jake had something the alien did not have: experience with close combat and the will to win at any cost. Jake set down his rifle and drew his combat knife. The alien leader looked confused. Why would the human give up his ranged weapon? Advantage? It did not understand that Jake was making a statement. This fight would be personal. The alien attacked first, slashing downward with both claws. Jake rolled to the side and came up behind the creature, slicing with his knife across the back of its leg. The alien roared in pain and spun around, but Jake was already moving again. Jake had learned hand-to-hand combat from military instructors who had studied every known fighting style in human history. He used techniques that were thousands of years old, refined by countless generations of human warriors. The alien was strong and fast, but it was fighting with instinct alone. Jake dodged another claw attack and drove his knife into the aliens, side just below its arm. The creature stumbled and fell to one knee, green blood flowing from the wound. Jake stepped back and looked into its eyes. The alien leader made a sound that Jake recognized as a plea for mercy. It was the same sound the other alien had made before Jake shot it. The proud hunter was now begging for its life. Jake thought about his dead friends, about the 12 human colonies that had been destroyed by these creatures, about all the innocent people who had died for the aliens' twisted idea of sport. He shook his head again. The knife went in just below the alien's head, and the creature fell forward onto the frozen ground. Jake picked up his rifle and looked around for the remaining aliens. Most of them had run into the crystal forest, but a few were still visible among the mining equipment. They were no longer trying to fight. They were just trying to hide. Jake systematically hunted down each of the remaining aliens. Some tried to surrender, making the same pleading sounds their leader had made. Others attempted to hide among the crystals or behind the mining vehicles. A few even tried to run back toward the research building, perhaps hoping to find shelter there. None of them succeeded. Jake was relentless and methodical, using all the skills he had learned and all the advantages the human-built environment provided. One by one, the last members of the hunting party were eliminated. When it was over, Jake stood alone among the crystal formations. The battlefield was quiet, except for the soft humming of the crystals and the distant sound of wind. Over 100 aliens had surrounded him with confidence and cruelty. Now they were all dead or fled, and Jake Morrison was still alive. Jake walked back to the research building and checked the time on his grandfather's watch. The entire battle had lasted less than 2 hours. From the moment he triggered the lights until the death of the alien leader, it had been 107 minutes of systematic warfare. Jake went inside the building and sent another message, on the communication array. This time he was not calling for rescue. He was reporting a complete victory and requesting a cleanup crew to deal with the alien bodies. While he waited for the response, Jake sat down in the control room and thought about what had happened. The aliens had come to his planet to hunt, humans for sport. They had expected to find weak prey that would run and hide until they were caught and killed. Instead, they had found something they were not prepared for. They had found a human who understood that survival sometimes required becoming more dangerous than the things that wanted to kill you. They had found someone who could turn their own environment against them and use their instincts as weaknesses. Most importantly, they had found a representative of a species that had spent its entire history learning how to fight and win against impossible odds. Humans had not evolved as the strongest or fastest creatures on their world. They had survived by being the smartest and most adaptable. 3 hours later, Jake saw the lights of human ships descending through the planet's atmosphere. The rescue team had arrived, along with military reinforcements and investigation specialists. They would document what had happened here and make sure the story was told throughout human space. Jake walked outside to meet the landing ships. The crew members who emerged were amazed to find him alive and uninjured. They had expected to find a battlefield where a heroic last stand had ended in death. Instead, they found one human standing victorious among the bodies of over 80 alien hunters. The story of the Battle of Kepler 442b spread quickly through human military networks and then to civilian populations. People called it impossible, then inspiring, then legendary. Jake Morrison became a symbol of human determination and tactical superiority. But for Jake, the most important thing was simpler. He had kept his promise to his grandfather about never giving up, no matter how bad things looked. He had honored the memory of his fallen friends by making their killers pay the ultimate price. The aliens had come to hunt a human for sport. Instead, they had taught the galaxy an important lesson about what happened when someone tried to make humans into prey. Jake Morrison had shown them that humans were not victims to be hunted. They were predators to be feared. The battle had been over in minutes, but its impact would last for generations across the stars.